Yesterday's prophecies, today's headlines. This is the Hal Lindsey Report. And now, Hal Lindsey.
Good evening and welcome to the Hal Lindsey Report for this week. Well, some unexpected, unusual events have taken place just recently that are fitting into the whole prophetic scenario. Some of them are almost weird, but they do fit. Stand by and you'll hear. Iranian government officials announced this week that they had arrested dozens of cyber spies in the wake of the discovery of the Stuxnet computer worm virus. On Saturday, Iranian intelligence minister Haidar Moslehi announced that the Iranian security service had captured several nuclear spies. He said the enemy had sent electronic worms through the internet to undermine Iran's nuclear activities. Moslehi didn't identify the nationalities of the so-called nuclear spies, but the Iranians know that the Stuxnet worm was not planted through the internet. The Siemens-built command and control systems affected by Stuxnet are not connected to the internet. The only way to introduce the virus into Iran's computerized infrastructure would be on a little USB flash drive like this. The flash drive would have had to have been manually inserted into a computer on the system in order to infect it. It is now believed that the systems were infected either accidentally or deliberately by the Russian technicians working on the nuclear projects inside Iran. Arrests have been made at the Bushehr, Natanz, and Isfahan nuclear plants, and even in Tehran, too. Now, this indicates that the infections were widespread and not confined to a single nuclear facility. When I reported the story last week, the worm had already been detected at many other Iranian industrial sites as well. Moslehi also hinted at a widespread dragnet aimed at ferreting out other foreign cyber spies. The Russian scientists, technicians, and engineers were the only foreigners with access to the heavily guarded nuclear power plants and enrichment facilities. The investigation will be aimed at determining whether the worm was planted accidentally or deliberately. Whether or not the Russian technicians were actually guilty of cyber spying became instantly irrelevant to the hundreds of Russian technicians inside Iran awaiting a knock on the door from Iranian security interrogators. The announcement triggered an exodus of Russian technicians with their families from Iran, further damaging the project. You see, this development is almost as bad as the original cause. The Russian experts are needed now more than ever to unravel the damage and fix it. The Iranian scientists are not really capable of running the nuclear program, much less fixing such a major problem. Nobody has yet claimed responsibility, although most fingers are pointed at Israel. Beside the obvious motives, which include Iran's many threats to wipe Israel from the map once it has nuclear weapons, and its ongoing support of terrorist groups dedicated to Israel's destruction, accusers cite another clue. The New York Times reported that it has been discovered that deep inside the Stuxnet code is a file labeled Myrtus. Experts speculate that it may be a reference to a word that refers to the Old Testament book of Esther. Esther recounts the story in which Jews thwart a Persian plot to massacre them. Ralph Langner, a German computer security expert, first deduced that Myrtus could be an allusion to Esther, who was born Hadassah, the Hebrew word for myrtle. On the other hand, it could be just a coincidence, or it might have been planted as disinformation by someone wanting to point the finger of blame at Israel. Well, whoever planted Stuxnet did Israel a favor, not to mention the rest of the world. The worm was brilliant, right down to the reference to the book of Esther contained therein. It was like a signature, yet so obvious as to be useless. It was exactly the sort of thing that somebody would do if they were trying to frame Israel anyway. So as a clue, it is worthless. But as a taunt, it's priceless. Back in the good old 20th century, man, that sounds strange for me to say the old 20th century. That was my century. They used to say that all it took was for the giant U.S. economy to sneeze and the rest of the world would catch cold. America was the engine of global economic growth. When it faltered, other economies stumbled. When it stumbled, other economies fell. That's what they used to say. They don't say that anymore. The United States has been in an undeclared state of economic warfare that began about the same time as the Al-Qaeda attacks on New York and Washington in 2001. Back in May of 2001, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez held a summit meeting. Their goal was to create a strategic alliance against U.S. dominance as the world's only superpower. The two leaders hammered out yet another version of a new world order. Since Venezuela and Russia are two of the world's largest oil producers, they decided to combat U.S. dominance by working to fix global oil prices. The Voice of Russia World Service, the official broadcasting arm of the Russian government, reported at the time that the two nations have found common ground in their approach to the establishment of a new world order by the coordination of Russian and Venezuelan energy policy. Moscow described the summit as a significant event and emphasized the importance of oil price fixing in the accomplishment of the summit's goals. According to Moscow, the regulation of world oil prices predetermined the development of the talks. It's important to note that since then, the U.S. dollar has lost almost a third of its value against other currencies. Further, Russia, Iran, and Venezuela have been working for years to develop an alternative currency for use as a benchmark for international oil sales, replacing the U.S. dollar. At the turn of the 21st century, roughly 70% of U.S. currency was being held in foreign exchange for use in international trading. With that currency essentially being kept out of circulation, the Federal Reserve was able to print it again without anybody noticing. Shifting from the dollar as the world standard reserve currency to an international basket of currencies has become an increasingly important topic of discussion in global financial circles. Referred to as decoupling, it would release all these reserve dollars into the marketplace, which would be disastrous for the United States and for those who hold large quantities of U.S. dollars. So quietly, America's enemies began to make the shift. Now they're being followed by our friends. By 2004, the Bank of International Settlements reported that U.S. dollar deposits from OPEC countries were down 75% from the year before. Over the same period, the share of euro-denominated deposits of OPEC countries rose to 20%. In 2005, China negotiated major oil and natural gas rights from Iran. In January 2006, China was the second largest holder of U.S. debt. Now, in 2010, China holds 5 times as much in U.S. currency reserves or U.S. debt as our next largest debt holder, Japan. For this reason, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank are expected to soon recommend officially decoupling from the U.S. economy. They predict positive but slow growth in advanced countries, while developing nations continue to expand at a very high rate. The judgments enumerated in the book of the Revelation for the last days are separated into 4 different categories. They are symbolized by the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, found in Revelation chapter 6, verses 2 through 8. The rider on the white horse represents the conquest of the Antichrist. The rider on the red horse represents the outbreak of major war. The rider on the black horse represents economic global collapse. The fourth and final rider, the rider on the pale horse, represents mass global deaths. Now, we aren't in the tribulation yet. America remains relatively prosperous and free. The four horsemen haven't yet begun their ride, but it seems clear to me that their horses are already saddled up and chomping at the bit. I'll be back after this message. Hal Lindsey Media Ministries is pleased to announce yet another easy way for you to support the Hal Lindsey Report. Our new toll-free telephone number, 1-888-RAPTURE. By calling this toll-free number, you can obtain copies of the show on DVD. You can also give a tax-deductible gift or designate a monthly pledge to help keep this program on the air. Supporting the Hal Lindsey Report has never been easier. Operators are standing by 24 hours a day, ready to take your call. So call today, toll-free, 1-888-RAPTURE or 1-888-727-8873. Please call today. You know, sometimes I wonder if Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad isn't simply jealous of TV FaceTime given to people like Lindsay Lohan and Paris Hilton. It seems his outrageous charges and comments are intended to stoke the media fires even when everyone knows they're just falsehoods and fabrications. A little like Baghdad Bob from the Iraqi war era. This week, Ahmadinejad repeated his charges that the United States government was involved in and possibly coordinated the September 11th attacks against itself. He made similar accusations at the UN. That prompted the delegations from 32 nations to get up and walk out. That's what we noticed. 32 countries got up and left. What Ahmadinejad noticed was that 160 delegations remained seated and applauded enthusiastically. Believe it or not, Ahmadinejad's charges find a willing audience abroad. I suppose that's the reason he's repeating them again this week, because there are no end of useful idiots out there willing to embrace any charge against America, no matter how crazy. This week, Ahmadinejad also accused Washington of dragging the world through the mud, and he predicted the burial of the United States. He's already compared the power of Iran's enemies to a mosquito, saying that Iran deals with the West over its nuclear activities from a position of power. He also compared the United States to a farm animal trapped in a quagmire in Afghanistan. But on Sunday, he went even further. Speaking to a group of military men and clerics in Hashtagard and broadcast by both state television and the official English language press TV, Ahmadinejad used language that in Iran is reserved for hated enemies. Angry about recent U.S. statements that the military option against Iran is still on the table, the president said, "May the undertaker bury you, your table, and your body, which has soiled the world." The crowd chuckled and applauded the scurrilous insult, but the remarks are in sharp contrast to statements he made in August to Al Jazeera Arabic news channel. Then Ahmadinejad offered Iran's friendship to the United States. It's not like any of this is news to anybody else outside of Washington, D.C. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is not and will not be a credible partner in any sort of resolution to the nuclear standoff with Iran. And since he's not even the supreme authority in Iran, the mullahs are, what good will it do to have him supposedly agree to a deal? All Iran's unclenched fist will ever gain the United States is a slap in the face.